Does the 49er offense have tells? You know, this is another year, another story about, man, this is the Patrick Queen.
The Patrick Queen interview. You saw that.
Yeah, Patrick Queen, for people who didn't see it, what I'm referencing here is Ravens linebacker Patrick Queen, who's a great young player, former LSU star, went on the Rich Eisen show, and he was discussing facing both the Niners and the Dolphins. And here's his quote. It's tells in what Miami does and what San Francisco does. He said San Fran. That San Fran does that I can't say right now, just in case we have to see those guys again. You just have to affect the quarterback. You got to get your D linemen into those lanes. Just play coverage. Don't let anybody get behind you. So, you know, he's not going to expand on that. He didn't. He's
not yet. He said not gonna, maybe later.
He's not going to talk about it. He also said Purdy could, quote, make every throw and make all the reads, and that the Ravens were concerned about jamming all those up. In fact, Queen was very complimentary of Brock Purdy throughout the interview. He
said he deserves to be in the MVP conversation.
Right. But he said the T word,
tells.
Yep. And, you know, if this is not the first time that we've heard about this, Jesse, Jesse and you and I have been doing the big show for the last month or so. Jesse put out one of the hottest moments of his channel was when he put out the different stances from Trent Williams and the tells that went into those. And some people debunked that, later on. Trent himself said, "Oh, it's nonsense." But you could see what Jesse was pointing to when he made his argument. Then you can go even further back. And, Richard Sherman brought up that Jimmy Garoppolo had a tell. And he basically said that when Garoppolo patted the football, that he was going to throw it. And yet Garoppolo kept patting the football, and the Niners, and he said this in like 2018. The next year, Garoppolo and the Niners were in the Super Bowl. So I guess I'll throw it to you this way. Do you believe that Patrick Queen is, all I'll say is this. If they had the tell on the 49ers, then why did the Niners pile up 421 yards of offense in that game? If they really had the tells where they could turn off the Niner water, then how come the Niners had such big numbers rushing and passing in that game? That, I don't know that I would say the interceptions were all fluky, but a couple of them were. How concerned are you that the 49ers have easily to identify tells in their offense in any phase, running, passing, in any way?
I think it's up front. You got to run football from the inside out. There are a couple of things that I feel like are just ingrained in the game of football that you cannot deny. And just like I know, Larry, you've been in the game longer than I have. If you can't block it, you can't run it. That's the way football works, especially offensively. And there are pressure packages that the Ravens were using against our offensive line that were kind of putting us in conundrums. Now, the picks notwithstanding, I get it. A lot of those were tipped, Brock pressing, Kyle not adjusting. So I'm not going to go into like the whole tinfoil hat rabbit hole of, there's a definite key that unravels this whole thing, because that's the elephant in the room, right? That's the dog whistle when you say somebody has a tell. The tell is, that means that they know the entire offense now. No, a tell is something that could just tip to a pass or a run. a tell can tip to whether they're going to go what side of the field that the ball is going to. A tell doesn't necessarily mean that they know the offense. So let's
I'll give you an example of a tell. Let me give you one example of a tell. When I was coaching and scouting in the Canadian League, we played the Las Vegas Posse. Great. Okay. Well, this is the American expansion of the CFL in the mid-90s. We're playing the Las Vegas Posse. They had former Florida State wide receiver Tamarick Vanover. Do you remember Tamarick Vanover?
No.
Wide receiver, really athletic, really, really fast. But he was really young, kind of an immature guy. I watched, they told me, Krug, here's the Posse's last 3 games. Go spend the rest of the day, sit in that room, roll that thing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and come away with something that will help us win the effing game. I mean, it was like I was just like the bottom of the totem pole guy, right? So they just threw my day away and said, go watch Vegas Posse film and find a tell. Find something. Give us something that can help us win. So I watched and I watched and I watched and I watched and I watched. I mean, literally, Coach, 10 hours of watching. And I found something. On plays that were going to be pass plays, he had these big loopy Velcro connectors to his gloves, right?
Yeah, he would redo them.
And so you could pull it almost like batting gloves. But just his receiver gloves had a big loopy connector Velcro thing. When they were running the ball, he left it flopping in the wind. You could see
he didn't care.
He would come out of the huddle, walk over to his position, and it was loose. When it was a pass play away from him, he would do the same thing. When it was a pass play and he was a primary, he tightened that thing up and was like, you could see him working it coming out of the huddle, and he cinched it tighter. And he's like, you could see him. He was like going like this with his hands. He was really trying to
get ready to get a ball.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I said, Coach, I think I got one for you. I think I got one. And I think he almost thought I was full of it. Like, they were throwing away my day because I was such a young scout. And they're like, so their coaches come on in the room. Krug's got something.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm under pressure. And I go, well, I don't know if this is
That's
anything.
The way it works, though. They gang up on you. They almost treat us like kickers on the low.
On the low level, it's like, let us do the real stuff. You just mess around.
Make the pick.
So I cut 7 or 8 snaps. I'm like, here you go. Here's 4 snaps of run plays. Here's 4 snaps of pass plays. And I showed them out of the huddle, and I zoomed in, and I'm like, look at him tightening up his gloves. Look at him grabbing his hands. Look at him. He's like preparing to catch the ball on pass plays. On run plays, the gloves are loose. They're flapping in the wind. We used it. It came true every time. This guy would come out of the huddle. He's got these gloves that are flapping. Our guys are just glancing over to him, and we're reading run. Key and run. He's tightened those things up. We're key and pass.
So what was the response? Did they buy it?
No, they loved it. They were like, they gave me a game ball. I got a game ball out of it. We destroyed them. It's a CFL. It's a passing league, so it's a lot of passing. But the guy, he was such a young receiver. He'd only played a year or 2 at Florida State. He was a very raw receiver, and he didn't realize that he was giving away run pass. That was a tell that I identified, told the guys about. We used it, and we also had other tells, like for teams where, we're literally, it wasn't even a player tell, it was a coaching tell. And it was the coach. We had guys on the binoculars as they would signal in plays. They would try to kind of fool us. and we had tells from the booth. Like we're
All right.
watching their booth, and we could,
Yeah.
they had things that they were giving away
I'll
from
give you
the
a sneaky
booth.
tell. I'll give you a
So
sneaky tell.
there are such things as tells.
Yeah, okay.
If
So
you don't cover
yeah.
your footprints, and you're not really thinking about it.
Yeah, and it's not, and I feel like it's not as it's really kind of like guerrilla warfare on the low. So like when I was at Bowie State, a tell that I used to know is what I would do is in pregame, I would walk around coaches, and in pregame you're talking to opposing coaches, especially when the specials are out. And what I would do is I would kind of like glance at play sheets. So you don't have to read the play sheet, but usually play sheets are color coded, right? And they're color coded by pass run. So if you know exactly what somebody's looking at on what side of the play sheet, then all you got to do is have the binocular up during a couple of plays and get the first 10 plays out. And you're like, all right, when coach is holding the bottom of that play sheet, they're going run. All right, that's the green side of that play sheet. That's what they're going. When he holds the top of that play sheet, look at where his eyes are going. He's going to the top of that play sheet. And usually if it's run, what he does is he takes it and he folds it under his right arm and he waits because he wants to see run fit. If it's a pass play, he's just kind of listening, and you could tell he's not really in on the play right now. He's just watching. So there are tells where if you watch enough, you can really understand what's going on. And covering your mouth really doesn't do anything. Really, like you can almost kind of look at what Kyle's calling, like based on how he's holding the play sheet, right? Like if he's looking at something that he's coming back to, it's almost like he goes to an annex part of the play sheet and he holds like the bottom third of the play sheet up because he's looking at that part versus holding like the entire play sheet, looking at it from top to bottom. So you can, yeah, there's tells all over the place if you pay attention.
The most common tell, I think, that you're going to find, and the players spot this on the field themselves, but sometimes the coaches are really good at it, and they'll remind guys, is teams that pull their guards. If you've got a veteran guard and he's pulling,
he'll be back.
He'll deep set.
Mm-hmm.
He'll deep set. You look at the line of scrimmage from a bird's eye view, and you're like, you can see the right guard is like 8, 9, 10 inches further back because he's looking to get out of that hole, and he's basically just cheating up because he knows he's got to get around quickly, and he's gassed and he's tired, so he's looking for a little advantage. So
the same thing on D-line. They stunt when they're stunting, when they're not aligned on the line of scrimmage, and you know that the post or the puller, whoever's looping, they're back further versus the guy who's going to post because he wants to be able to get as much depth as possible so the looper doesn't have to get washed out as much. They can flatten that loop to get as much real estate to the line of scrimmage. So yeah, you can look on the line of scrimmage. You could read shoulders. Guys that don't stay parallel with the line of scrimmage will tell you where the ball is going. Offensive linemen who love to get in 2-point on pass or screens or short yards, but they love to get in 3-point downs when they know they're going to have to use their body moving forward. There's tells all over the game if you watch enough.
Yeah. No, seriously. And there are people that are really good at it. There's also teams that really hide their play calling. Like, they know somebody's watching them with binoculars in the booth.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll have 2 guys making signals. And if you can discern really early on in the game which guy is actually making the signals and which guy's the fake, teams feel like, well, we'll have 2 guys doing signals. We don't have to hide it that much. Well, wait a second. If we can figure it out quick, then we're not worried about Coach B doing signals, and we can check out Coach A signaling in plays. And maybe they're not even trying to hide it all that much because they figure out, well, we'll do enough by having 2 coaches, signaling in plays at the same time. Well, okay, but if we can figure out which is the fake, then you bet we're going to be able to read your plays. So I mean, there's the old saying: if you're not cheating, you're not trying. I mean, I know baseball players who could steal signs incredibly well. And I mean, they were guys who were on the bench that just were awesome at stealing signs. The Kevin Fransden, who used to work on KMBR radio, was one of the best at stealing signs and figuring out in baseball what was coming. So, but all I would say is this is the second time, Coach, that the Ravens have referenced that they had tells. You heard Kyle Van Noy on that podcast say, hey, everybody, we showed everybody the blueprint of how to defend the Niner offense. And then his, my guess was simply that they blitzed off the edges.
Mm-hmm.
They dropped linebackers into coverage. They dropped their safeties deep. They pretended like they were reading the receivers, but instead they were really reading the quarterback. They really clouded the windows that they thought Brock wanted to throw into.
Mm-hmm.
And they made it so those windows were tighter because there were more people in them. I don't know if that's a tell or if that's just reading your tendencies, knowing what a team likes to do from film study. But we're at the point in the year now, Coach, where if you really are good at film study, it's all there.
It really is. It's hiding in plain sight.
It's not week 1 or week 2. Week 1 or week 2, who knows? But now you've had months of film. And if you really do your homework, you should have some tendencies, not just for the Niners, for every team in the league. Every team in the league has tendencies, coaching tendencies, player tendencies. And if you're good enough with your film study and you got enough manpower on it and they're smart enough, sharp enough, you can figure out what your opponent wants to do and what their mindset is.
Well, I agree with you. And, this guy didn't necessarily work out. This didn't work out well for this guy that I'm about to bring up. But this isn't the first time we've heard about players who have done a little bit of self-study and deep dive on the 49ers offense, talking about how they have tells. Patrick Peterson talked about this earlier in the year, if you remember, saying that I know that he said he was going to have picks on Brock Purdy and do a great job. And he did have his opportunities a couple of times, but I'm kind of going back to an interview or a podcast that he did with Brian McFadden, former Pittsburgh Steelers cornerback. And I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the quotes that he had on what he sees from the 49ers on tape. So I'm going to go ahead and get into that for a second. All right.
Sure. Yeah.
So it was on the latest episode of All Things Covered podcast with co-host and cousin Bryant McFadden. Peterson harped on that T word, tackling, time and time again. If we do a good job of tackling the guys at the point of attack, we're going to be in a good position to be able to sustain those guys from making big plays, Peterson told McFadden. Because if you go back and watch the Philadelphia Eagles game, those guys was hugging up on those checkdowns. When you give a dynamic running back 3 or 4 yards of space, he's going to make one guy miss. If we do a good job of hugging up on those checkdowns, those outlets that those guys that just hang out on the sideline, those late leak out guys, I think we'll be in pretty good shape. He also goes on to say, Peterson noted the 49ers have had the league's best yak attack this last year. They tied the Kansas City Chiefs and the Carolina Panthers for the best yak reception per last year at 6.6 yards. Peterson also goes on to say they have the number 1 running back, the number 1 tight end, the number 1 receiver with yards after the catch. When you think about it, the plays that Christian McCaffrey is doing, he ain't there running no post, Peterson said. He ain't running no dig. He's swinging out in the backfield. Deebo Samuels, he's not running no deep balls. He's not running the full route tree. He's running drag routes, taking 4 yards routes and taking it 80. Kittle as well. So those are some of the comments that he had before we played the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that's kind of some of the things that are highlighted on what players see when they see our offense, where they're starting to see like, man, you guys are necessarily trying to take a little and make it a lot, trying to be physical, trying to push past us. You guys want to be able to leak out and get everybody behind you so we can come out from underneath. And if you think about it, essentially from the raw application of what our offense is from a passing standpoint, that really is us. We run clear out routes, and then what do we run? We run deep overs, digs, comebacks. We run underneath. We take guys deep and we run underneath, or we split the field in half and overload. We lock one guy to the side singled, we overload on the other side, and then what happens? We come off with a pass concept that either gets something coming out on the backside, on the same side as the lock side, or we have something that comes under it in a 3-tiered concept where Brock can choose 1, 2, 3, or he can get a hot to get the ball out to Christian McCaffrey or get a quick screen route. And they'll do it from a condensed standpoint, so you can't see where the guys are coming from a spread out perspective. Like, our offense is pretty redundant when you look at just the posture of what we do. It's how we get to it is what the tells would be in, right? So when we look the same way, literally every play, and we bring out the same maybe 10 formations in our offense, it's the packaging that are the tells for me. If I was going against our team and I was on defense or offense, I would be watching film on what are the packages and what are the situations, because this is a planned team. You don't have this many plays built in for these. Like, basically, if you think about it, Larry, how many plays out of the plays that we run on offense are beaters or just straight up hat on a hat, our bread and butter? You see the difference that I'm talking about? Like, hat on a hat, this is what we do. This is our identity. This is what we run even when you know it's coming, because this is what we've repped out, versus this is a section of our offense that are just beaters, stick beaters, man beaters, zone beaters, coverage beaters, where if you look at our offense, we don't really have a lot of the latter, right? The former, I mean, where we have wide zone, outside zone, we're running it. I don't care if you see it coming. This is what we do. Outside of that, a lot of the stuff that we do is beaters. So if I was a coach planning to go against the Niners, my plan would be to interrupt that plan, right? I want to get you guys to have a contemporaneous conversation with us in the now. No more what you planned for us, but I want you guys to be able to call plays that have to call that shit from the sideline. So that's where I feel like teams really want to get that's where they want to attack our offense. They want to take us into deep water. They want to get us away, because if we find a tell, that's really our offense, right? Finding tells on the defense. So that's the problem. Who's going to figure out who first? And really, our problem with our offense is when a defense doesn't have a tell. When you play a defense where they're stout across the board, there's no corner, there's no safety that's inept, there's no linebacker that you can put in a conundrum, there's no pass rush that you can get away from, there's nothing interior wise where you can run duo or double block somebody because the D-line is really bad, but they only have one tip of the spear guy like the Rams, or other teams like the Steelers, where you're really going to see maybe 2 to 3 good D linemen where you can engineer around these guys. That's not the Ravens, right? So that's the thing about our offense is, what is our offense going to do against a defense that isn't going to give you anything? They're going to, they're smart enough.
It's really interesting, I think, when you look at this season. The Niners have 4 losses. By the way, Last Second Sports, Jesse's in the chat. Good morning, Jesse. He says, Self-Scout shows them. He said, Self-Scout, show them what they want to see and give them something different. Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of that this time of year where not only will the Niners look at what the opposition does, they'll take the time and be like, all right, we're 17 weeks into this season, 16 games. When other people scout us, what are they seeing? And if you're a really good football team, and the Niners are, you got personnel that are giving you the self-scouting. So you have a real good idea of what teams are seeing from your statistics. And I asked Shanahan about this a month ago. I said, are you aware at all times of your tendencies? And he's like, yeah, I get all the numbers on that and what stands out. And he's looking for things that really stand out as obvious. So if we've run 100% of the time out of this formation, or and they'll try to go against their own tendencies to muddy the picture for teams scouting them. And that's something that they do consider. That's why people, when they question the play call, I'm always like, there's a lot of factors. There's a lot of factors. It could be that they're trying to run the right play. It could be that they're trying to change the scouting report for next week. I would imagine there'll be 5 or 6 or 7 or more plays in this game that will be solely meant to change the statistical breakdown for the teams that are scouting the Niners in the playoffs. And if they're really sharp, they'll separate this game and throw it out. The opposition will, and they won't really look at these tendencies, or they'll read it as what it is. The Niners trying to throw us off their scent.